Today is January 6th, 2021. Today is the conclusion of Christmas Tide, the 12 days of Christmas, which finds its culmination in Epiphany. Now, Epiphany is the celebration within the liturgical calendar, the church calendar, where we recognize, where we lift up the magi, the magicians, the wise men that come from the east, what we commonly think of as probably Persia, Babylon area, and visit the Christ child. And we find this story in the Gospel of Matthew, in the early part of the Gospel. And over the course of Advent and into the last part of December, I started reading chapters from Henry Van Dyke's The Story of the Other Wise Man. And I'm going to conclude that story today. So I'm going to read chapters 4 and 5 together. Since this is ultimately an Epiphany story, I'd like to conclude it today. And so just to give you a reminder of where we've been, we are picking up the story of a man named Artaban, who is one of the other wise men, one of the other magi, and this is fictional, of course. It's a created story, who it brings his own treasure to meet the new king, which is to be found in Jerusalem. And along the way, he misses his party, and so he's kind of left behind to make the journey on his own. And he comes across somebody in need, and he gives one of his jewels up to support this man who, it's almost like a Good Samaritan story. Then he finally gets to Jerusalem. He goes to look for the child and finds himself in a home of a woman who has a child, and Herod's order goes out to kill all the babies under 2 years old, all the baby boys. And Artaban gives his second priceless jewel, which he was going to give to the new king in order to save the life of a child. And each one of these is kind of a moral dilemma for Artaban. And that's where we pick up the story here. So now he knows that the Holy Family, Joseph, Mary, and the Christ child, Jesus, have left Bethlehem, and they're now on their way to Egypt. And so Artaban goes seeking out and searching and looking for. And we pick the story up here with the narrator saying, "I saw Artaban moving among the throngs of men in populous Egypt, seeking everywhere for traces of the household that had come down from Bethlehem, finding them under the spreading sycamore trees of Heliopolis, beneath the walls of the Roman fortress of New Babylon beside the Nile, traces so faint and dim that they vanished before him continually, as footprints on the hard river sand glisten for a moment with moisture and then disappear." The narrator goes on to say, "I saw Artaban again at the foot of the pyramids, which lifted their sharp points to the intense saffron glow of the sunset sky, changeless monuments of the perishable glory and the imperishable hope of man. He looked up into the vast countenance of the crouching Sphinx and vainly tried to read the meaning of the calm eyes and smiling mouth. It was indeed the mockery of all his efforts and all aspirations. As one of his compatriots, Tigranes, had said, the cruelest jest of a riddle that has no answer, a search that can never succeed. Or was there a touch of pity and encouragement in that inscrutable smile of the Sphinx, a promise that even the defeated should attain a victory, and the disappointed should discover a prize, the ignorant should be made wise, and the blind should see, the wandering should come into the haven at last? I saw Artaban again in an obscure house in Alexandria, taking counsel with a Hebrew rabbi, the venerable man bending over the rolls of parchment on which the prophecies of Israel were written, reading aloud the pathetic words which foretold the sufferings of the promised Messiah, the despised and rejected of men, the man of sorrows and an acquaintance of grief. And remember, my son," the rabbi said, fixing his deep-set eyes upon the face of Artaban, "the king whom you are seeking is not to be found in a palace nor among the rich and powerful. If the light of the world and the glory of Israel has been appointed to come with the greatness of earthly splendor, it must have appeared long ago. For no son of Abraham will ever again rival the power which Joseph had in the palaces of Egypt, or the magnificence of Solomon throned between the lions of Jerusalem. But the light for which the world is waiting is a new light, the glory that shall rise out of patient and triumphant suffering. And the kingdom which is to be established forever as a new kingdom, and the royalty of perfect and unconquerable love. I do not know how this shall come to pass, the rabbi said, nor how the turbulent kings and peoples of the earth shall be brought to acknowledge the Messiah or pay homage to him. But this I know. Those who seek him will do well to look among the poor and the lonely, the sorrowful and the oppressed. So I saw the other wise man again and again traveling from place to place, searching among the people of the dispersion, with whom the little family from Bethlehem might perhaps have found a refuge. He passed through countries where famine lay heavy upon the land and the poor were crying for bread. He made his dwelling in the plague-stricken cities where the sick were languishing in the bitter companionship of helpless misery. He visited the oppressed and the afflicted in the gloom of subterranean prisons, the crowded wretchedness of slave markets, the weary toil of galley ships. In all these populous and intricate world of anguish, though he found none to worship, he found many to help. He fed the hungry, he clothed the naked, he healed the sick, he comforted the captive. And his years went by more swiftly than the weaver's shuttle that flashes back and forth through the loom. It seemed almost as if he had forgotten his quest. But once I saw him for a moment as he stood alone at sunrise, waiting at the gate of a Roman prison. He had taken from a secret resting place within his bosom the pearl, the last of his 3 jewels. As he looked at it, a mellow luster, a soft, iridescent light, full of shifting gleams of azure and rose, trembled upon its surface. It seemed to have absorbed some reflection of the colors of the lost sapphire and ruby that he had given away earlier. So the profound, secret purpose of a noble life draws into itself the memories of past joy and past sorrow. All that has helped it, all that has hindered it, it was transfused by a subtle magic into its very essence. It became more luminous and precious the longer it was carried close to the warmth of Artaban's beating heart. Then at last, while he was thinking of this pearl and of its meaning, the end of the story of the other wise man came. Chapter 5, Pearl of Great Price. 33 years of the life of Artaban had passed away. He was still a pilgrim, a seeker after light. His hair, once darker than the cliffs of Zagros, were now white as wintry snow that covered them. His eyes, once flashed like flames of fire, were dull as embers smoldering among the ashes. Worn and weary, ready to die, but still looking for the king, he had come for one last time to Jerusalem. He had often visited the holy city, had searched through all its lanes and crowded hovels and black prisons without finding any trace of the family of Nazarenes who had fled from Bethlehem so many years ago. But now it seemed as if he must make one more effort, and something whispered in his heart that at last he might succeed. It was the season of Passover. The city was thronged with strangers. The children of Israel, scattered in far lands all over the world, had returned to the temple for the great feast, and there had been a confusion of tongues in the narrow streets for many days. But on this day there was a singular agitation visible in the multitude. The sky was veiled with a portentous gloom. The currents of excitement seemed to flash through the crowd like the thrill which shakes the forest on the evening of a storm. A secret tide was sweeping them all in one direction. The clatter of sandals, the soft, thick sound of thousands of bare feet shuffling over the stones, flowed unceasingly along the streets that lead to the Damascus gate. Artaban joined company with a group of people from his own country, Parthian Jews, who had come up to keep the Passover. He inquired of them the cause of the tumult and where they were going. "We are going," they answered, "to the place called Golgotha, outside the city walls, where there is to be an execution. Have you not heard what has happened? 2 famous robbers are to be crucified, and with them another called Jesus of Nazareth, a man who has done many wonderful works among the people, so that they love him greatly. But the priests and elders have said that he must die because he gave himself out to be the Son of God. Pilate sent him to the cross because he said he was king of the Jews." How strangely these familiar words fell upon the tired heart of Artaban. They had led him for a lifetime over land and sea, and now they came to him darkly and mysterious like a message of despair. The king had finally arisen. But he had been denied, cast out. He was about to perish. Perhaps he was already dying. Could it be the same who had been born in Bethlehem 33 years ago, at whose birth the star had appeared in heaven and whose coming the prophets had spoken? Artaban's heart beat unsteadily with that troubled, doubtful apprehension which is the excitement of old age. But he said within himself, the ways of God are stranger than the thoughts of men, and it may be that I shall find the king at last in the hands of his enemies, and shall come in time to offer my pearl for his ransom before he dies. So the old man followed the multitude with slow and painful steps towards the Damascus gate of the city. Just beyond the entrance of the guardhouse, a troop of Macedonian soldiers came down the street, dragging a young girl with torn dress and disheveled hair. As the Magian paused to look at her with compassion, she broke suddenly from their hands, threw herself at his feet, clasping around his knees. She had seen his white cap and winged circle on his breast. "Have pity on me," she cried. "Save me from the sake of the God of purity. I also am a daughter of the true religion which is taught by the Magi. My father was a merchant of Parthia, but he is dead. For I am seized for his debts to be sold as slave. Please save me from that which is worse than death." Artaban trembled. It was the old conflict of his soul which had come to him in the palm grove of Babylon and in that cottage at Bethlehem. The conflict between the expectation of faith and the impulse of love. Twice the gift which he had consecrated to the worship of religion had been drawn from his hand to the service of humanity. This was his third trial, the ultimate probation, the final and irrevocable choice. Was it his great opportunity, or was it his last temptation? He couldn't tell. One thing only was clear in the darkness of his mind. It was inevitable. And does not the inevitable come from God? One thing only was sure to divide his heart. To rescue this helpless girl would be a true deed of love. And is not love the light of the soul? He took the pearl from his bosom. Never had it seemed so luminous, radiant, full of tender, living luster. He laid it in the hand of the slave. "This is thy ransom, daughter. It is the last of my treasures which I have kept for the king." While he spoke, the darkness of the sky thickened and shuddering tremors ran through the earth, heaving convulsively like the breast of one who struggles with mighty grief. The walls of the houses next to him rocked to and fro. Stones were loosened and crashed into the street. Dust clouds filled the air. The soldiers fled in terror, reeling like drunken men. But Artaban and the girl whom he had ransomed crouched helpless beneath the wall of the praetorium. What had he to fear? What had he to live for? He had given away the last remnant of his tribute for the king. He had parted with the last hope of finding him. The quest was over, and it had failed. But even in that thought, when it was accepted and embraced, there was a peace. It was not resignation, it was not submission, it was something more profound and searching. He knew that all was well because he had done the best he could from day to day. He had been true to the light that had been given to him, and he had looked for more. And if he had not found it, if a failure was all that was to come from his life, doubtless it was the best that was possible. He had not seen the revelation of life, everlasting, incorruptible, and immortal. But he knew that even if he could live his earthly life over again, it could not be otherwise than it had been. One more lingering pulsation of the earthquake quivered through the ground, and then a heavy tile shaken from the roof fell, struck the old man in the head. He lay breathless and pale, with his gray head resting on the young girl's shoulder, the blood trickling from his wound. As she bent over him, fearing that he was dead, there came a voice through the twilight, very small and still, a voice like music sounding from a distance where the notes are clear but the words are lost. The girl turned to see if someone had spoken from a window above, but she saw no one. Then the old man's lips began to move as if in answer, and she heard him say in their native Parthian tongue, "How can it be, my lord?" When did I see you hunger and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did I see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? When did I see you sick or in prison and come to you? 33 years have I looked for you, but I have never seen your face nor ministered to you, my king." He ceased, and that sweet voice of music came again. And again the maid heard it very faintly and far away, but now it seemed as though she could understand the words. "Verily I say unto you, as you have done unto the least of my brothers, you have done it to me." And a calm radiance of wonder and joy lit the pale face of Artaban like the first ray of dawn on a snowy mountain peak. One long last breath of relief exhaled gently from his lips. His journey was ended. His treasures were accepted. The other wise man had found the king.